We are now live.
Okay, we'll now call the estimates meeting to order. This evening, our clerk is Julia Sippel, support managed by Melanie Figueredo. That's the first time I've had to pronounce that. Can we do the roll, please?
Councillor Antosky,
Here.
Councillor Sless,
Present.
Councillor Vanderstelt,
Present.
Councillor Wall,
Present.
Mayor Davis,
Present.
Councillor Carpenter,
Present.
Councillor Sicoli,
Present.
Councillor McCreary,
I am here.
and Councillor Martin.
Here. So since this is our first estimates meeting of the year, we'll go through the rules of procedure. So I'd just like to remind committee and the viewing public a few procedural rules for our virtual meeting in operation as efficiently as possible. All members will be muted for the meeting to reduce feedback. All web cameras for committee members shall be turned on. Staff will be requested to join the video meeting should the need to answer questions of members of committee arise. Any member of committee should indicate they wish to speak by pressing the raised hand button at the bottom of the screen. Clerk staff will lower the hand when you have been recognized by the chair for your speaking opportunity. In the event a connection service interruption occurs that affects quorum of the estimates committee, we may recess the meeting for up to 15 minutes to regain quorum. If quorum is not achieved, the meeting will be adjourned. All members of the committee participating via online video conference will vote using eScribe, and the clerk will announce the vote results. Members of the public who registered as delegates are able to take part electronically via webcam or via the telephone for the meetings. All rules for delegations under the city's procedure bylaw continue to apply. Members of the committee, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest for any of the items on tonight's agenda? Seeing none, we'll now call on Joelle Daniels, Director of Finance, City Treasurer, to present the capital budget overview. Please note that you have 10 minutes to present and that questions will be held until the item is on the floor during the debate portion of the meeting.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Chair Martin and members of the Estimates Committee. We are excited tonight to present for you an overview of the 2022 capital budget and 10-year capital forecast. Next slide, please. The development of the capital budget and long-term forecast is multifaceted. It looks at outputs from significant vision documents, including the Transportation Master Plan, Master Servicing Plan, and other corporate master plans. It also considers our asset management policies and plans for our current assets, in addition to Council's priorities, and ultimately the development of the financial plan to allow the capital budget to proceed. Next slide, please. There are a number of funding sources to support the capital plan, which I'll get into in a bit more detail over the next couple of slides. But those funding sources do include developer contributions, tax-supported capital reserves, user rate-supported capital reserves, gas tax and other grants, and finally debt. Next slide, please. So the first funding source is developer contributions, and this is mainly through the collection of development charges that are collected from developers in accordance with the current DC bylaw. Development charges can only be used to fund the eligible growth-related portion of projects that have been identified in a development charges background study. But in the development of this plan, we do have a couple of other types of developer contributions we are using. Most notably is the cash in lieu of parkland reserve as well. Next slide, please. Next is our tax-supported capital reserves. So these reserves are funded through annual contributions from the tax levy, and they currently total $21.9 million annually. And those contributions go to three main categories of capital reserves. First being our service-specific reserves, so dedicated allocations to capital reserves such as roads, facilities, fire, parks, Sanderson Center, etc. Next is a contribution to the general capital envelope. And those funds can fund any capital needs of any tax-supported program. And lastly is the capital levy reserve, whose funds are allocated to support tax-supported state of good repair projects. Next slide, please. Next is our user rate capital reserves, which are funded through transfers from the rate supported operating budget. This is largely contributions from the water and wastewater budget. And the 2022 budgeted contribution to these reserves is expected to be $8.6 million and $8.1 million respectively. Next slide, please. The next funding source is gas tax and grants. The Federal Gas Tax Fund has recently been renamed and is now going to be called the Canada Community Building Fund moving forward. It is a permanent source of funding for the city, and our allocation is based on population. And our current allocation is $6.1 million annually. We're also fortunate to receive other grants from the federal and provincial government, either through application-based or formula-based programs. These include the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, or OCIF, which just last month announced a $7 million contribution for the city in 2022. In addition to the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, or ICIP, which is funding a number of transit projects under their transit funding stream. Next slide, please. And lastly is debenture financing. So council has an approved debt servicing cap, which is a limit on the percentage that debt servicing costs can be of own source revenues. So that cap is currently set at 7% for non-DC funded projects. And with council's recent adoption of the debt management policy, the cap can be extended to 10%. However, that incremental amount can only be used to fund growth-related debt that would be serviced through the collection of development charges. And with everything currently planned for in the 10-year forecast, we expect to remain within those limits. Next slide, please. So now that we've reviewed the major funding sources, we will get into the details of the 2022 capital program and the 10-year capital plan that you'll be considering during this estimates process. The development of this updated 10-year capital plan does come with its pressures. Firstly, I'd just like to note that the updated master servicing plan and transportation master plan in 2021 has added a number of mainly growth-related projects to the plan that will require some front-end financing in some cases to implement. Secondly, there is no capital levy increase for 2022 in accordance with 2022 council approved budget guidelines. And lastly, the most recent asset management plan update for the city's core assets. So that would include assets such as water, wastewater, stormwater, roads, and bridges, indicates a funding backlog of approximately $210 million to address existing assets that are in poor condition. Next slide, please. But given all of this, we are presenting to the committee a fully funded 10-year capital plan. The success of that plan does depend on a number of assumptions. I've identified the key ones here. The key ones being that there will be a continued support of a capital levy beginning in 2023 to address the infrastructure deficit in the State of Good Repair program. Secondly, that development charges would be collected as forecasted, meaning growth will occur at the pace that's been forecasted in the development charges study. And lastly, that there will be minimal approval of capital projects outside of the budget process. Next slide, please. So now to the numbers. The committee is being presented with a 2022 capital budget that totals $138.6 million. And an estimated 10-year capital forecast totaling over $1.25 billion, with public works leading the vast majority of the plan in each year. Next slide, please. So how are we funding this plan? For the 2022 budget, which is depicted in the chart on the left, the largest funding source is our tax-supported reserves at 26%, followed closely by our rate reserves at 26%, development charges at 18%, and then debt at 17%. When we do look to the 10-year, which is depicted on the chart on the right, with the addition of a number of growth-related projects, the major funding source shifts actually to DCs and development-related debt, which together account for almost 40% of the funding of the 10-year capital plan, followed by tax reserves at 25% and rate reserves at 17%. Next slide, please. I do just briefly want to touch on debt. There are 10 non-DC funded projects that are proposed to utilize debt financing over the entire 10-year plan, 3 of which are included in the 2022 capital budget. These include the next phase of the police facility redevelopment project, which is just the benefit to existing portion. The growth-related portion is being funded from development charges. There's the John Noble Home Belcourt redevelopment project, and we're expecting that increased per diem funding from the province will pay for the debt servicing costs for that debt. And lastly is the first phase of the next accommodation strategy project, which is the Earl Ave redevelopment. There is no DC related debt required to fund the 2022 growth related program, but it will be required over the 10-year planning horizon. Next slide, please. We're providing this chart as a simple way to depict that at no time are debt servicing costs anticipated to exceed the limits that have been established by council. So our non-growth debt servicing, which is represented by that orangey red line, will remain below the 7% of own source revenues, which is depicted by the blue line. And then once we layer on the growth related DC debt, which is represented by the yellow line, it remains below the 10% of own source revenues as depicted by the gray line. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So just moving forward, as far as the process for the capital budget, tonight's meeting serves as an introduction to the 2022 capital budget. Beginning next week, you will have the opportunity to review the projects contained in the plan with various boards and commission staff. Those commission-specific evenings will begin on Monday, January the 10th, with local boards, fire, and People Legislative Services and Planning Commission. Will continue on Wednesday, January 12th, with a CAO, the Community Services and Social Development Commission, and Public Works. And Monday, January 17th will be the continuation of Public Works. We have held Wednesday, January 19th as an additional night if it is needed, but it is anticipated that the capital budget would be approved at the January 25th regular council meeting. Next slide. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Pretty much right on your 10 minutes. Very good. Okay, there are no registered delegations for tonight's meeting. So now, Joelle, if you could do the update on, or the overview for step 1A.
Absolutely. Through you, Chair Martin. So in August, City Council did approve the 2022 budget direction and guidance report, which included a recommendation that stated that the meetings of the Estimates Committee would be scheduled to begin in January of 2022 to consider the capital budget first, which would be followed by operating. So that is the process that we are doing. The report indicated that the 2022 capital budget and long-term capital plan would be considered and approved first, which would allow for competitive procurement processes to be let well before the construction season. Many of you will recall from last year that the Estimates Committee received a one-year capital budget while we were waiting for completion of the official plan, the Transportation Master Plan and Master Servicing Plan. But now that these plans are complete, staff has prepared a 10-year capital plan for this Estimates Committee. And as indicated in the guidelines, the first 5 years of the capital budget have been provided to you with full detail sheets, with the remaining 5 years just provided in a summary format.
thank you. Now we need a member moves that the vote. No, sorry. We need a mover and seconder to get the opening motion as outlined in step 1B on the floor. Mayor Davis, seconded by Councilor McCurry. Okay, as a reminder, no vote will be taken on the opening motion as amendments will be made throughout the Estimates Committee capital budget process, with a final vote occurring at the last estimates meeting to approve the capital budget as amended. So with that, we have questions. Mayor Davis, you're first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Joelle. Joelle, first of all, I want to thank you very much for once again giving us a very excellent presentation overview. As usual, highly organized, highly informative, and thank you for all your efforts. I don't want to drill down into details. We'll have individual nights for that. But I got a couple of questions. And when I went through the capital budget, I was looking for certain projects and not seeing them. An example would be the Woodman Pool, which I thought we'd approved. And there were a couple others like Dufferin Park, that sort of thing. So should I be alarmed, or is there an easy explanation for these kind of large, important projects for the community that I thought we'd approved and were in the works for this coming year? So.
Yeah, certainly through Chair Martin to you, Mayor Davis, those projects were actually approved in prior estimates committee. So through 2019 and 2020, 2021 budget processes. So those projects are on the books. They have been funded. They are currently considered a work in progress. And they don't need to come back again for additional approval.
Right. So these are new projects that haven't really gone through that sort of process, that are not, as you say, work in progress or work in process. So the next question I have for you is that the recent provincial announcement of the $7 million before Christmas, I think that was larger and more than we thought it was going to be. And how have you allocated that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the timing of that announcement actually wasn't great for this process. So we have gone ahead with the capital budget that was adopted. I believe Public Works would be considering how best to allocate those funds, whether it's to replace some of the existing funding that we have already allocated to some projects, or to be able to move forward some projects that perhaps needed to be delayed further in the process due to funding constraints. But I expect that a report would come later on how specifically.
We can't put it into reserves then, I take it we have to spend it.
We actually do need to put it into reserves, and then we would, there's a requirement in the agreement that we do so, and then we would come to council with recommendations and approval on how to best spend it.
Yeah, and is there a time limit on when we do have to pull it out of reserves and use it?
There is, I believe it's 5 years.
5 years, great. Okay, my last question to you is, so last year staff spent a lot of time developing a new system for prioritizing our capital projects and determining how to rate projects and how to prioritize them for various years. That's a new process, pretty rigorous. Has that been used on this capital plan, or is it going to be used? Where's that at, that process?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I may need to call on Indy to speak to the prioritization matrix. Oh, he's on now.
Yeah, thanks, Joelle. Through you, Chair Martin. Mayor Davis, so we ran it in the background, but this is not the first year we're using it. Next budget cycle will be when we run all the projects, but we did test it with a few projects this year. So you'll see the prioritization really come out next year. Not to say that these projects aren't priority that you're going to see this year, but running it through that tool and getting staff up and used to it, we picked out about, I think, about 100 projects to just do this year. In the background.
Okay, and what was the result? Did it cause any changes, or did it just simply confirm that, yeah, we've done a good job?
Yeah, it's more using the tool just to see if it is working and it's providing the details that we actually need it to kind of spit out for us. So next year we're going to see, once that tool now is running through the bugs and whatnot, then we'll see next year it actually give us a true list of our priorities.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilor McCurry, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Joel, thank you for the presentation. If I'm reading this correctly, we're going to draw 36 million from tax-supported reserves this year. What's the annual contribution from tax-supported going into the reserves accounts for 2022?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. There's a number of tax-supported reserves that receive a capital allocation, but it does total $21.9 million annually from the tax levy.
Joel, are you saying that's a consistent number that we've been doing every year?
It has been growing in years where the capital levy was approved. So that's been intermittently on and off approved over the years. So it's been a bit of a gradual climb over the last 5 years.
Can you recollect what the similar number was for 2021?
I believe it was the same number. There wasn't a capital levy approved in 2021 either.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Councillor Carpenter, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Martin. And Joel, in your presentation, excuse me, you mentioned $210 million shortfall in core assets, and then you listed our core assets. And what concerned me was water and wastewater were listed in there. Are we short in funding our core assets as far as water and wastewater go?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, I would maybe need to defer to Public Works to speak to the details of the infrastructure funding deficit, or perhaps we can provide more of that information back to you. Indy, I'm not sure if you want to comment.
Yeah, through you, Chair Martin. I think it's best we bring that back to really get the details, but the shortfall is for some of the state of good repair and what we need to do. We are keeping up with that, but there's obviously more that we can do in terms of extending that life cycle earlier. So it's not to say that we're not getting to those projects. It's just the projects that we do need to get to for our state of good repair. If we had an X amount, we could then catch up on and extend that life earlier of that asset. But we could bring some of that information back on Public Works Night for you.
Yeah, thank you, Indy. But my main concern and the question that why I raised the question was a wastewater and water is a fee for service, and we have built-in capital repairs and maintenance as part of that program, and that's why I asked the question. Having a shortfall in wastewater and water when we're already having high water rates and high sewer rates, that everyone thinks, including myself, that that's fully funded by that program. It's a self-funding program, as I understand it. But when you bring the information back, please share it with all members of council so we can be sure how that's working, man. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, Councillor Slush, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Joel. Joel, the $7 million grant that we got late in the year, does that come with strings attached? Like, is that only for certain types of capital, or is that at our discretion?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it is only for certain types of capital. It's really the core public work assets, I believe, roads, bridges,
Okay.
water, wastewater.
Okay, so you can't start building swimming pools or arenas or that type of thing. It is restricted.
Correct.
Okay. And then secondly, if I could, Mr. Chair, the DCs that we are collecting, are we collecting at the old rate or the new rate?
We're collecting at the new rate.
Okay. Now, is there a possibility that I know it's been appealed? So if that appeal was successful, does that throw the entire budget into a quandary?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it would really depend on the extent to how successful the appeal is. We're certainly still going to collect for DCs. The basis of the appeal was really around the pace of growth and some very specific services. I don't expect it's going to be overly burdensome to proceed with some projects when planned, may require a bit of additional DC related debt financing if we still needed to proceed with them in the manner that we're planning, but I don't expect it to be extremely onerous.
So you sound comfortable.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no further questions, I just have one. In your presentation, Joelle, you talked about the debt limit of 7% and going up to 10% for growth-related items. I thought when we did that 10%, we also included projects that generated revenue that would cover off their debt payments. Was that not part of that 3% addition?
Through Mr. Chair, actually, the policy only speaks to the additional 3% to be able for DC funded projects. It actually doesn't speak to servicing through either increased provincial per diem funds or rate supported debt. It was just specific to growth.
Okay. I thought we changed that, but I guess we didn't. Thank you. Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, that brings us to 2C. I believe Councillor Antonsky, you wish to move this one? If you could state your seconder, please.
Bear with me. Sorry, I'm bouncing between screens here. Will that come up on the screen for me? Moved by myself, and I'm seeking a seconder, Councillor Carpenter. Sorry, is it coming up? I'm not fast enough on my screens here. Hold on. Oh, there it is. Thank you. That report 2022-26 titled Climate Environmental Impact Scan for Public Works Commission be received, and that additional information referenced in this report related to GHG emissions data that is not yet available be presented to council in the quarterly climate change update reports as available.
Okay, and Councillor Carpenter was your seconder. Questions or comments? Mayor Davis.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Martin. So my questions come out of the report that we were given in relation to 2C in this motion. And it has to do with trucks. And I see that it talks about how making a switch in the types of trucks we order to reduce the amount of carbon produced as a result of city-related activities involve the use of trucks. And I see some of the trucks are going to be hybrid. That's great. Hard right now to go to electric trucks because they aren't quite ready for the market. But I noticed there's quite a few of these trucks that, and in particular, I'm looking at reference items 415 through to 534 on pages 5 and 6 of the report. Just wondering why those aren't hybrid.
Through the chair, yeah, I can speak to this in some capacity. Most of the hybrid trucks that are proposed are light duty trucks. So there are some hybrid light duty trucks available in the market. The others are medium duty or may require some sort of specific type of availability that isn't available as hybrid at this time. I can certainly get more information on that and bring it forward through the Public Works meeting. Sorry, I see Brian's there. Well,
I came through, Mr. Chair. We just reviewed a report yesterday that'll be coming to Cow Operations next on Tuesday. It deals with this very subject in a lot more depth about cars, trucks, and the EV and electric and those sorts of things. It's a full blown up answer to your question on that you're asking, Ms. Rumney, Mr. Mayor, through Mr. Chair.
All right, great. I'll wait for that report. The other question I have for you, Rochelle, great to see we're doing the analysis of the 3 greatest carbon producers in city operations led by the Wayne Gretzky Center, which is just so energy intensive, arenas and pools. Do you have any idea what the end result of that might be? Do we think that coming out of that assessment, we may have some concrete measures to how we can reduce the carbon input from those 3, which is, I think, the Lions Park, the Wayne Gretzky, and the Civic Center?
through the chair to you, Mayor Davis. Yes, the intention of that feasibility study is to look at those 3 arenas and provide a roadmap for getting to a carbon neutral facility. So that would probably look at equipment upgrades, maybe some increased insulation in the building envelope, and potentially some renewable energy solutions as well. But we don't really know until that feasibility study is completed, but the intention is to get to a carbon neutral facility.
Right. And what about the rest of our buildings? I recall your report last year said about 50% of the carbon the city produces from its activities, the corporation of the city, is buildings and heating buildings. When do you think we're going to, and you can address that in part through better insulation, energy efficiency, but to the long-term solution is how you produce the heat, right? And when do you think we can begin to tackle that seriously? I realize the technology may not be here yet to do it, but.
Yeah, through the chair, that was one of the short-term action items to start to look at the buildings, and to convert 50% of the buildings to carbon neutral. So we need to develop a plan and a strategy for that still, and understand which buildings are eligible for converting to carbon neutral and which would need to be sold or otherwise dealt with. So that's something that we're looking into. Certainly converting away from natural gas furnaces is going to be a big part of that. Electric heat pumps are certainly evolving quickly, so that's something that we can look into more.
Last, I wanted to thank you, Rochelle, and I guess Councillor Antosky. It's great to see, concrete results of the climate emergency action plan, and seeing now how it's going to impact on the decision making that we do. That we have this carbon component and input in respect to our decisions, especially on capital assets. So, thanks. I know there's a lot more to come, but I think this is a good start.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Sless.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Rochelle. Rochelle, you're quite aware that I have a constituent that keeps asking me for a cost-benefit analysis to be done on everything we're doing with this climate project. Are we anywhere near being able to start to answer those types of questions for folks like this gentleman that is very inquisitive and calls regularly to see if there's an update? Do we have anything in the hopper that will be able to answer some of those types of questions?
Through the chair to you, Councillor Sless. I've been thinking about this, and I've been asking around, and I haven't come up with anything that would fully encapsulate that question as a whole. It's very complex because it does include, when you're dealing with mitigating emissions today, you're looking at avoiding future costs from climate change impacts in the future. And as we get closer to that 2050 goal, it's only going to get more and more expensive to mitigate if we don't deal with it sooner rather than later. So it's a complex question, and I am still looking into it, and I will get something back to you in response to that.
Okay, well, I wouldn't make that your life's work, Rochelle, but I do have a very inquisitive mind that keeps asking that question. So if there's something that you could put together that might address some of that, I think that would probably go a long way in satisfying the thirst for information. Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, I have one. Have you seen the new technology for the combined solar panels that are both photovoltaic and thermal?
Through you, no, I'm not familiar with those in detail, but I can look into those.
Yeah, it improves the efficiency of the photovoltaic by cooling the panels, and it also provides a heat source to supplement into a heat pump system to improve the heating ability. Councillor Utley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Rochelle. Rochelle, thank you for a wonderful report. It's great to see that we're capturing real good data on our successes. Is there an opportunity now or in the future that we'll be able to compare ourselves with other municipalities who are trying to lower their emissions? And it'd be interesting to see how we are how we're doing compared to other surrounding communities. Could you comment on that, please?
Through the chair, that I don't have that information for you today, but I can start looking into that. We have done a GHG emissions inventory, and I know other municipalities are doing those as well. So it would just be a matter of gathering that information and sort of understanding how municipalities are decreasing. I'm sure somebody is looking into that comparison, so I'll ask around.
Thanks, Rochelle. It'd be interesting to see, you know, at the top of it, are we leading or are we at the bottom or somewhere in between? And what can we learn from those that are at the top? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Hutchings, you wanted to comment on that?
And not to the specific question, Councillor, through Mr. Martin, but on this reporting on our reports, this was posted by some of our municipal partners. This is we're one of the few councils in this province of Ontario that are actually separating on reports regarding GHGs. How we're doing in exercising and getting our GHGs down is another matter, but the first step is reporting on them, recording them, and then doing something about them. So that is we're leading there and in that area in the province.
Okay, Councillor Carpenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Rochelle. Rochelle, we have an inventory of our greenhouse gas emissions. We took an inventory early on, and we're looking at how well we're doing in bringing that number down. Is there a way to separate that number from new growth related items that we may be doing, so we can understand from where we were to where we are on the items that we had when we did the inventory?
Through the chair, that would be easier to get a handle on from a corporate perspective. And we have addressed that in this report to some capacity. Some of it is replacement vehicles versus new expansion vehicles. So we've divided it out in that way. On the community side of things, I don't know if that would be very easy to do. We get sort of aggregate data from the electricity providers and the natural gas providers and the gasoline providers. So to know what's new versus old isn't available to us, but you can think about that a bit.
But can we look at our own assets, for example, if we add a new library or we add a new facilities, like can that greenhouse gas emissions be added separately so we could see how well we've been doing on the existing ones?
Through the chair, yes, certainly we would be able to separate out existing assets from new assets, and we can make that clearer in emissions inventories going forward.
Thank you, I appreciate that. All right.
Councillor Antosky.
Thank you, Chair Martin, and thank you, Rochelle, for the report. I have a comment and a question. A comment, actually, CAO Hutchings came on and kind of alluded to this. There are a lot of communities trying to figure this out. They're trying to figure out the measuring tools and the GHG lens, the climate impact lens that we're using. And I believe, and Rochelle's probably being a little bit too shy about this, but she has presented on this because communities are reaching out and asking, how are you doing it? This is so great that you're doing it. And you know, I'm sure CAO Hutchings could also provide more specifics on that. But my question is to you, Rochelle, and we talked a little bit about this today, and I was talking about literacy, and you know, there's many of us that'll read this and say, well, I don't, you know, you're talking about the avoidance, but I don't know what that means, and I don't know by how much that means, and I don't know if you've had a chance to put it through, but when we're looking at an avoidance of, I think it was, there it is, 96.34 tons of CO2, can you put that in terms that would make sense to someone like me that does not speak this language?
Through the chair, yes, certainly. I have been thinking about that. And so I could certainly put together a chart with equivalencies with sort of common reference points. So for example, that 96 tons of carbon that's avoided is equivalent to approximately one transit bus. So a transit bus a year, a diesel transit bus produces about 90 tons of carbon dioxide a year, or that's equivalent to about 28 cars, residential private cars a year as well.
Excellent, thank you. Those are the kind of equivalent measures I need to understand whether that's good, bad, or, you know, if we're making a mark. So thank you very much for this. I am also thrilled to see some of this tangible stuff. We know you've been doing a lot in the background, and this is not easy work to get on paper and to work through. It's pretty convoluted and complicated. So thanks for all the work on this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mayor Davis, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair. So Rochelle, your report's micro in nature. Micro, when I say that, I mean it's in reference to the corporation, the city of Brantford. Do you have any idea what percentage of the carbon that's produced by everything that happens in our city, what percentage of that comes from the city on a very rough basis? Do you have any idea of that?
Through the chair, I have calculated this in the past. I think that it's small. It's maybe about 2%, but I can get you a more accurate number after this meeting.
Yeah. I don't ask that question to suggest that we shouldn't do anything because we're small, but I do it because, you know, as I said many times in the past, Councillor Antosky has created a change in my mindset and my worldview, everything we've seen the last year as well, wildfires, etc. I mean, we're really starting to see the impact of climate warming, and it's getting harder to deny that it exists. And it's in some ways frightening, especially when you're concerned about your grandchildren and great grandchildren who haven't shown up yet. But what I'm getting at is this: can we are trying to tackle this problem, even though we only represent 2% of what's produced locally. And I think we're creating best practices, not only for other municipalities, but for other carbon producers in the community. And in particular, I'm thinking of the business community. Have you thought about that? Gee, as we refine what we do, can we create templates? Can we help others in our community, when I'm primarily businesses, I think, or even individuals, how they can change what they're doing, following some of the good practices that we're going to be implementing so they can do their part in reducing the amount of carbon that our community produces.
Through the chair, yes, I think that's a great idea. I think that will come out of the community climate change action plan that's currently under development. We're hoping to get that out in the spring of this year, but that will really provide resources to businesses and residents and other private entities in the community to reduce their emissions. So we hope to develop some of those and certainly use our own experience and our own examples as resources for them.
So you're getting excited about what you can do? It is very exciting. And thanks again, Rochelle. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one comment in the way that what we're doing will help with the greater community is every city employee who drives an electric vehicle that we purchase becomes more familiar with electric vehicles. And as Mr. Hutchings can probably attest to, once you drive an electric vehicle and become comfortable with it, you'll want one. So there's a thumbs up for Mr. Hutchings. So that's one small way that we're going to help within the community as well, by encouraging some of our own employees to consider electric vehicles. So any further questions or comments on this item? Seeing none, we'll call the question.
Councillor Utley, I'm just waiting on your vote. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Hello?
Donna, that helps. I've got nothing on my screen.
Yeah, I got
the
the
affirmative for me, please.
Thank you. And sorry, Councillor Wall as well.
Yeah, in the affirmative.
Thank you. Step 2C, Climate and Environmental Impact Scan for Public Works Commission carries unanimously on recorded vote. Those in favor: Mayor Davis, Councillor Sakoli, Vanderstelt, Utley, Celeste McCurry, Martin, Carpenter, Antosky, and Wall.
Okay, with that, our agenda for tonight is complete. We'll recess until Monday, January 10th at 4:30 p.m. Before we leave, though, just one question. These meetings typically go into the evening. Do we want to have a dinner break around 6 or 6:30? Is that something that councilors would appreciate? I see a number of thumbs up and no thumbs down, so that will be the plan going forward. Okay, thank you, everyone. It's been a good meeting.